You've been told a story about the 1%, a story about power, about money, about success, about talent, about genius, and somewhere along the way, you started believing it. You believed that the 1% are different, that they were born ahead, that they had something you don't, that they live in a separate world, unreachable, untouchable. But what if I told you the greatest advantage the 1% ever had was not money, not connections, not luck, but a lie you quietly agreed to believe? Welcome to the 1% Illusion. In this audiobook, you're going to discover something uncomfortable and powerful. You will uncover why the 1% is not what you think it is, why most people are psychologically programmed to stay average, the invisible contracts you signed without knowing, the emotional habits that keep you from rising, the real discipline advantage nobody talks about, and how to dismantle the illusion starting today. This is not financial advice. This is not a promise of overnight wealth. This is a wake-up call about identity, awareness, discipline, and mental ownership in 2025. A world of AI automation, social comparison algorithms, remote work distractions, and constant digital noise. The 1% is not a bank account, it is a way of thinking. And here's the punchline you need to hear in the first minute. The 1% don't win because they're special. They win because they stopped believing the story that keeps you still. Think about it. Why do so many people scroll past success stories and immediately say, must be nice, probably lucky, connections, rich parents? Why is our first reaction dismissal instead of curiosity? Why does the mind protect comfort before it pursues growth? Because believing the 1% are unreachable protects you from responsibility. If they're different, you're safe. If they're gifted, you're excused. If they're lucky, you don't have to change. The lie feels better than the work. But here's what most people never notice. Every single time you explain away someone else's success, you are quietly explaining away your own potential. And that explanation becomes identity. Identity becomes behavior. Behavior becomes destiny. This audiobook is not here to glorify the wealthy. It's here to expose the illusion. Because the real divide is not money. It is ownership. And over the next chapters, we're going to dismantle the myth piece by piece. Chapter 1 begins with a hard truth. The 1% is smaller than you think. Not because of money, but because of discipline. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Comfort Conspiracy. The biggest lie about the 1% is that they compete against you. They don't. They compete against comfort. And comfort is winning, but not where you think. Look around you in 2025. Infinite streaming, infinite scrolling, AI-generated entertainment, endless comparison loops on social media, remote work without structure, food delivered in minutes, opinions delivered in seconds. We live in the most comfortable era in human history, and comfort is addictive, not physically, psychologically. Comfort whispers, tomorrow, later, you deserve a break. Just one more episode, just one more scroll. The 1% did not escape poverty by magic. They escaped comfort. That's the difference, because comfort feels harmless. It doesn't look like destruction. It looks like rest. It looks like reward. It looks like normal. But comfort becomes a pattern. Patterns become habits. Habits become identity. And identity determines your ceiling. Ask yourself something honestly. When was the last time you voluntarily chose discomfort for growth? Not forced discomfort. Voluntary. When was the last time you said, I will do the hard thing because it builds me. Most people don't choose pain unless pain chooses them. The 1% choose it early. That's the hidden edge. They train when no one is watching. They study when others scroll. They save when others spend. They learn when others complain. And here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not dramatic. It's boring. Repetition, consistency, delayed gratification. While everyone else negotiates with comfort, they quietly remove negotiation from the table. That's it. That's the illusion. The 1% is not glamorous. It's disciplined, but discipline doesn't trend. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't get applause, so we ignore it. Instead, we chase hacks. We chase shortcuts. We chase motivation. But motivation fades. Comfort remains. Here's something most people never admit. They don't want success. They want the feeling of success without the friction, without the grind, without the lonely hours. But growth is friction. Strength is resistance. Clarity is earned. And here's the line that will stay with you. Comfort builds cages that feel like freedom. Read that again in your mind. Comfort builds cages that feel like freedom. Because you can stay entertained. You can stay distracted. You can stay average without ever feeling trapped. That's the genius of the illusion. And if this resonates with you, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true, hit like as a contract with yourself. Not for the algorithm, for accountability. Because the first step to leaving the 99% mindset is admitting comfort has been in control. But this is only the surface. The deeper illusion isn't about comfort, it's about identity. And in the next chapter, we're going to expose the most dangerous belief you carry about yourself. The one installed long before you even knew what success meant. The belief that quietly limits your ceiling. The belief that keeps you explaining instead of executing. And once you see it, you won't be able to pretend you didn't. Chapter 2 begins with the question you've avoided your entire life. Who told you who you are? Please like and subscribe if you want a better future for your children, your family, and yourself. It's very difficult to achieve success today, but I'm sure you'll succeed. All you have to do is learn and discover new things. Chapter 2. Who told you who you are? Before you ever worried about money, before you ever compared your life to someone on a screen, before you ever heard the phrase top 1%, someone handed you an identity. It came from parents, teachers, friends, culture, religion, social media, statistics. It sounded innocent. You're not the ambitious type. Be realistic. People like us don't do that. Just get something stable. Don't aim too high. And slowly, or without realizing it, you build a mental ceiling. Not because you were incapable, but because you were conditioned. Most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they accepted a description of themselves that was too small. The 1% illusion begins here. We imagine the 1% as some external elite, but the real divide is internal. There are people who believe growth is expandable, and there are people who believe identity is fixed. If you believe your personality is permanent, your intelligence is capped, your discipline is genetic, your confidence is something you're born with, then you will never attempt the climb. You'll self-edit before you even start. And here's the cruel irony. The belief that you are not that type of person is the most powerful prison you'll ever live in, because it feels factual, it feels logical, it feels responsible. But it is borrowed. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many of your limits were actually tested, not imagined? Test it. How many opportunities did you decline because that's just not me? How many rooms did you avoid because you assumed you didn't belong? How many skills did you never build because you believe talent comes first? The 1% does not begin with money. It begins with self-permission. Permission to change. Permission to be bad at something long enough to become good. Permission to look foolish temporarily. Permission to outgrow your old identity. Most people never give themselves that permission. Instead, they protect their image. They protect their comfort. They protect consistency with who they've always been. But here's the truth that will shift your entire trajectory. The 1% are not people who were chosen. They are people who chose themselves. That's it. They decided their identity was editable. They stopped asking, "Is this me?" and started asking, "Can I become this?" That single shift changes everything, because identity determines action. If you identify as someone who struggles with discipline, you will unconsciously act in alignment with that. If you identify as bad with money, you will confirm that belief. If you identify as not confident, you will avoid situations that build confidence. Identity drives behavior. Behavior builds results. Results reinforce identity. It's a loop. The 99% live in unconscious identity loops. The 1% interrupt them. And here's the line I want you to carry forward. You are not stuck. You are patterned. Patterns can be rewritten, but only if you're willing to confront them. In 2025, identity is shaped faster than ever. Algorithms show you who you already are. They feed you content that confirms your current interests. If you scroll fitness content, you get more fitness. If you scroll drama, you get more drama. If you scroll wealth, you get more wealth talk. But here's what most people miss. The algorithm is not just shaping your feed, it's shaping your self-concept. You begin to believe you are the type of person who consumes what you consume. And so the cycle continues. The 1% understand something critical. Your environment edits your identity. So they edit their environment. They change inputs. They control exposure. They choose rooms that stretch them. They follow voices that challenge them. They consume information that demands growth, not comfort. If this realization hits you, if you're starting to see how much of yourself was inherited, pause, breathe, and ask yourself quietly, if no one had ever told me who I am, who would I try to become? That question is dangerous because it removes excuses, it removes history, it removes labels, and it reveals potential. But here's where it gets deeper. Most people don't resist growth because they fear failure. They resist growth because they fear social separation. If you grow, you may outgrow people. If you change, you may lose approval. If you aim higher, you may face criticism. So the subconscious chooses belonging over expansion. And that is the silent contract of the 99%. Stay familiar, stay acceptable, stay predictable, but the 1% make a different contract. They accept temporary isolation for long-term elevation. They endure misunderstanding. They withstand doubt. They tolerate being different because they know something most people don't. Belonging feels good. Becoming feels powerful. And you cannot fully experience both at the same time. Now here's where you must decide. Are you protecting your old identity or building a new one? Because the illusion of the 1% only survives when you believe they are inherently different. They're not. They simply refuse to let their past define their future. And if you've ever felt like there's more in you, more discipline, more focus, more clarity, more courage, That feeling is not delusion. It's friction between your current identity and your potential one. Don't ignore that friction. That friction is growth trying to surface. But growth demands something next. And this is where most people stop. Because the next step is not mindset, it's responsibility. And responsibility is heavy. In Chapter 3, we're going to dismantle the most addictive excuse of the 99%, the belief that circumstances are the primary barrier. And once we break that illusion, you'll realize the playing field was never as uneven as you thought. But are you ready to hear that? Because the next chapter will remove the final place you've been hiding. Chapter 3, The Addiction to Blame. Mate, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 3, The Addiction to Blame. Blame feels intelligent. It feels aware. It feels socially conscious. It feels justified. And sometimes it is. Circumstances matter. Systems matter. Background matters. Access matters. Let's be clear about something before we go deeper. This is not about denying inequality. This is not about pretending every starting line is equal. This is not about ignoring real obstacles. This is about power. Because there is a difference between acknowledging obstacles and assigning them control. The 99% acknowledge and surrender. The 1% acknowledge and strategize. Blame becomes addictive because it protects ego. If the system is broken, you don't have to fix yourself. If your boss is unfair, you don't have to upgrade your skills. If the market is saturated, you don't have to become exceptional. If your upbringing limited you, you don't have to outgrow it. Blame feels like clarity, but it quietly removes agency, and agency is everything. Let me ask you something that might sting. When something goes wrong in your life, your finances, your health, your relationships, your discipline, what is your first internal response? Do you analyze yourself? Or do you analyze the external? Be honest. Because this is where the illusion either breaks or tightens. The 1% have a brutal habit. They ask, what could I have done better? Even when the answer is uncomfortable, even when it hurts their pride, even when it exposes weakness. They don't do this because they enjoy self-criticism. They do it because ownership gives leverage. If it's your fault, you can fix it. If it's someone else's fault, you must wait. And waiting kills momentum. Now think about 2025. We have entire online communities built around outrage, entire identities built around criticism, entire feeds built around exposing corruption, unfairness, incompetence. And while awareness is important, constant outrage trains helplessness. You begin to believe the world is rigged beyond influence. You begin to believe progress is luck. You begin to believe success is privilege alone. And once you believe that, you disengage. That disengagement is the real trap. Because here's the uncomfortable line. Blame may explain your situation, but it will never improve it. The 1% don't deny problems. They simply refuse to let problems define their ceiling. They ask different questions. Instead of, why is this unfair? They ask, how do I maneuver within this? Instead of, why didn't I get the opportunity? They ask, how do I create one? Instead of, who's responsible? They ask, what's my move? That shift from explanation to strategy is where the divide widens. And this is where you must be courageous. Because the moment you stop blaming, you lose your emotional shield. You lose your justification. You lose your comfort. But you gain something far more powerful. Control, not over everything, but over your next action and your next action compounds. Most people underestimate compounding because it's invisible at first. Small skill improvements, small habit shifts, small network upgrades, small daily discipline. For months, nothing dramatic happens. And that's when the 99% quit, because they want visible reward. The 1% understand invisible investment. They're not chasing applause. They're building capacity. Capacity to think better. Capacity to execute faster. Capacity to adapt quicker. And adaptation is the ultimate advantage in this era. AI is changing industries. Markets are shifting. Attention spans are shrinking. The people who win are not those with perfect circumstances. They are those who move first. Responsibility creates speed. Blame creates delay. Let that sink in. Responsibility creates speed. Blame creates delay. And speed matters. Because in a world moving faster every year, hesitation becomes a disadvantage. Now here's the deeper layer. Sometimes we don't blame loudly. We blame quietly. We say things like, I just don't have time. I'm not in the right phase of life. I'll start when things settle. I need the perfect setup. Those sound reasonable, but they're sophisticated delays. The 1% start imperfectly. They build while messy. They execute while uncertain. They launch before they feel ready. Because they understand something crucial. Clarity comes after action, not before. If this part is challenging you, good. Growth rarely feels comfortable. And if you're starting to see moments in your own life where blame replaced ownership, don't shame yourself. Observe it, because awareness is the first pivot. And here's your pivot question. In the last year, what did you blame that you could have improved? Sit with that. Not defensively, not emotionally, strategically. Because this audiobook is not about motivation. It's about deconstructing illusions. And the illusion of helplessness is one of the strongest. But there's one more layer beneath blame, one that almost no one talks about. Because it's subtle. It's socially accepted. It even feels virtuous. It's the illusion of busyness. Chapter 4 is where we expose it, because being busy is not the same as building, and most people are addicted to activity without progress. In the next chapter, you're going to see how motion became a substitute for momentum, and once you recognize it in yourself, you'll never look at your schedule the same way again. Chapter 4, busy, but not better. Chapter 4, busy, but not better. There is a dangerous illusion that feels productive. It wears a calendar. It carries notifications. It speaks in deadlines. It looks exhausted. And it says, I'm trying. Busyness is the most socially acceptable form of stagnation. We glorify it. We praise it. We compare it. How busy are you? Crazy week. No time to breathe. It sounds ambitious. It sounds driven. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Being busy is not the same as building. And most people confuse motion with momentum. In 2025, distraction has evolved. You can answer emails all day and build nothing. You can attend meetings all week and move nowhere. You can consume productivity content and still avoid the work that matters. The 99% stay busy to avoid confronting impact. Because impact is measurable. Impact exposes effectiveness. Busyness hides it. Let me ask you something precise. If we removed all noise from your schedule, what measurable progress did you create this month? Not effort, not intention, progress. Did you increase a skill? Did you deepen a relationship? Did you grow income? Did you improve discipline? Did you expand influence? Or did you simply maintain motion? This is where the illusion tightens. We tell ourselves we're working hard. And we might be. But hard work without direction is just exhaustion. The 1% are not necessarily working more hours. They are working on fewer things with more intensity. They understand something subtle but powerful. Focus compounds. Fragmentation drains. Most people's attention is scattered. A little effort here, a little project there, a few unfinished goals, multiple half-starts, and they wonder why momentum never builds. The 1% eliminate, they cut, they simplify, they protect cognitive energy because attention is currency. And in the digital era, attention is under attack. Notifications, news, messages, updates, infinite content. The average person's mind is interrupted hundreds of times a day. You cannot build deep value in shallow focus. Let that settle. You cannot build deep value in shallow focus. And yet, we live in shallow mode. Switching tabs, switching thoughts, switching priorities all day. The illusion says, if I'm constantly moving, I must be progressing. But progress requires intention. It requires uncomfortable prioritization. It requires saying no, repeatedly. The 1% say no more than they say yes. They guard their schedule. They protect morning clarity. They eliminate trivial commitments because they understand something most people ignore. Every yes to something small is a no to something meaningful. Now this part might hit close. How many things are you currently doing that don't truly matter? Be honest. How many conversations drain you? How many tasks exist because you never question them? How many routines are inherited, not chosen? Busyness often hides avoidance. Avoidance of deep work, avoidance of strategic thinking, avoidance of confronting whether your direction is even correct. It feels easier to answer another email than to sit alone and design your future. It feels easier to stay occupied than to face uncertainty. But the 1% build in silence. They schedule thinking. They schedule learning. They schedule reflection. They treat growth as a priority, not an afterthought. And here's the line that will change your relationship with time. Time does not reward effort. Time rewards direction. You can run fast in the wrong direction and still lose. Most people are tired not because they're ambitious, but because they're unfocused. Energy scattered across trivial pursuits. Energy drained by low-value environments. Energy diluted by constant stimulation. The 1% don't necessarily have more energy. They waste less. That's the difference. Now let's go deeper. Busyness also protects ego. If you're always busy, you never have to measure yourself. You can say, I tried. You can say, I've been swamped. You can say, I just need more time. But clarity is ruthless. Clarity asks, what moved? And that question is uncomfortable because it forces alignment. And alignment requires honesty. If this is resonating, pause for a moment. Look at your week, not emotionally, strategically. What percentage of your activity truly moves you toward becoming the person you claim you want to be? If that percentage is low, that's not shame. That's information. Information creates power. And here's the pivot. Replace busyness with priority. Choose one skill, one direction, one mission, and double down. The 1% do not scatter ambition. They concentrate it. They become extremely good at something, not moderately good at everything. In a world obsessed with multitasking, depth becomes rare, and rare becomes valuable. Now here's the transition that matters. Once you eliminate busyness, you face something most people avoid at all costs. Silence. Silence exposes your thoughts. Silence exposes your fears. Silence exposes your inconsistencies. And that's why most people stay busy, because silence demands confrontation. But the 1% cultivate silence. They think deeply. They analyze themselves. They reflect on decisions. They question strategy. And that inner clarity becomes external execution. Without it, you're reacting. With it, you're leading. Now ask yourself quietly, are you leading your life or reacting to it? That answer determines everything. And in the next chapter, we're going to dismantle another powerful illusion, one that fuels comparison, envy, and quiet insecurity. Because social comparison has become the new mental prison. And if you don't master it, you'll always feel behind. Chapter 5. The Comparison Trap. Dear viewer, we strive to create high-quality videos for you. Please assist us in improving our efforts by commenting on what you like about the video and what you would change or add. We would be very grateful. Chapter 5. The Comparison Trap. Comparison is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispers when you scroll. It whispers when you attend events. It whispers when you hear someone your age doing better. And in 2025, comparison has become constant. You are exposed to more curated success in one day than your grandparents saw in a lifetime. Private jets, six-figure months, perfect bodies, perfect relationships, perfect morning routines, and the illusion deepens. You don't compare your real life to someone else's real life. You compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin to feel behind. Behind financially, behind physically, behind professionally, behind socially. But here's the truth that most people never confront. Comparison is not about them. It's about insecurity. It reveals where you feel uncertain. It exposes where you feel inadequate. And instead of using that information strategically, most people use it emotionally. They envy, they resent, they scroll harder, they distract themselves, or worse, they give up. The 1% don't eliminate comparison. They reframe it. Instead of asking, why them? They ask, what can I learn? Instead of saying, I'm behind, they say, what skill gap exists? Comparison becomes data, not drama. But that shift requires emotional maturity, because comparison triggers something primal. Status. Humans evolved in tribes. Status meant survival. If you were low status, you were vulnerable. If you were high status, you were secure. And social media has amplified status signals beyond anything in history. Likes, followers, views, revenue screenshots, public recognition, and your brain interprets it as hierarchy. You feel lower, and lower status feels like danger. So you either try to impress or you disengage. Both are reactive. The 1% don't chase status signals. They chase skill signals. Let that sink in. They don't focus on appearing impressive. They focus on becoming undeniable. That is a completely different strategy. Most people want to look successful. The 1% want to be valuable. Value compounds, image fades, and here's the uncomfortable observation. Sometimes you don't feel behind because you are. You feel behind because you haven't committed. There's a difference. If you dabble, if you half-start, if you hesitate, of course you'll feel behind someone who committed fully. That's not injustice. That's intensity. Now here's a powerful question. When you feel triggered by someone's success, what specifically bothers you? Is it their income, their confidence, their discipline, their visibility? Because whatever stings points to a desire you haven't pursued. Comparison reveals longing. But instead of admitting longing, most people mask it with criticism. They're fake. They got lucky. They won't last. They had advantages, maybe, maybe not. But here's what matters. Their results are information, and your reaction to them is information, and information can be used for growth or for ego protection. The 1% use it for growth. They study competitors. They analyze leaders. They reverse engineer success. They don't shrink, they sharpen. Now let's go deeper. Comparison also steals focus. Instead of improving your craft, you're watching someone else's. Instead of building your path, you're measuring theirs. And measurement without execution is paralysis. Every minute spent envying is a minute not spent evolving. And here's the line that will free you. Your timeline is irrelevant if your trajectory is strong. Read that slowly. Your timeline is irrelevant if your trajectory is strong. You don't need to win this year. You need to improve this year. You don't need to match someone's pace. You need to maintain yours, because sustainable growth beats explosive burnout. Now imagine something radical. Imagine if you muted comparison, not by deleting apps, but by deleting emotional attachment. You see someone ahead. Instead of shrinking, you take notes. Instead of doubting, you assess. Instead of reacting, you execute. That is how the illusion dissolves, because the 1% are not competing with you emotionally. They are competing with themselves strategically, and that's the shift. Stop measuring where you are against where someone else is. Measure where you are against where you were. Are you stronger, more disciplined, more skilled, more aware? If yes, you're winning, even if no one sees it. And here's something powerful. The most dangerous comparison is not external. It's internal. You compare your current self to your potential self. You know what you're capable of. And when you don't act on it, that gap creates discomfort. That discomfort is not failure, it's friction. And friction can either create heat or create fire. The 1% turn that friction into fuel. They don't suppress it, they channel it. Now here's your pivot question. Who would you become if you stopped comparing and started committing? Let that sit. Because commitment eliminates most insecurity. When you're focused, you don't have time to envy. When you're building, you don't obsess over someone else's results. When you're progressing, you don't feel behind. Progress quiets insecurity. Stagnation amplifies it. And that brings us to the next illusion. Because even when you stop blaming, even when you reduce busyness, even when you reframe comparison, there's one more hidden trap. It's subtle. It feels responsible. It even sounds wise. But it quietly kills momentum. It's the illusion of preparation. Chapter 6, Waiting Until You're Ready. And this is where the final excuses begin to collapse. Chapter 6, Waiting Until You're Ready. I'm not ready yet. That sentence has delayed more dreams than failure ever could. It sounds responsible. It sounds thoughtful. It sounds mature. But most of the time, it's fear wearing logic. You tell yourself you need more time, more money, more clarity, more confidence, more credentials. And while you wait, someone less talented but more decisive moves. The illusion says preparation comes first. The truth says courage comes first. Let me ask you something honestly. How many times have you postponed action because you wanted to feel certain? How many ideas are sitting untouched because you're still researching? How many opportunities passed because you didn't feel qualified? The 99% over-prepare. The 1% over-execute. That's the divide. Now, understand something critical. Preparation is important. Skill matters. Planning matters. But perfectionism disguised as preparation is paralysis. In 2025, you can learn almost anything online. You can access free courses, AI tutors, mentors, communities. The information barrier is lower than ever, but execution remains rare because execution exposes you. Execution invites judgment. Execution risks failure. Waiting feels safer because while you're waiting, you can still imagine success. Once you act, reality responds. And reality doesn't care about your potential. It responds to output. Here's the uncomfortable line. Potential is invisible. Performance is undeniable. Most people fall in love with potential. They say things like, I could be amazing if I tried. I know I'm capable. I just need the right moment. But capability without commitment is fantasy. The 1% are not fearless. They are decisive despite fear. They don't wait for confidence. They build it through repetition. Confidence is not a prerequisite. It's a byproduct, and that changes everything. You don't wait until you feel ready to start the business. You start, and readiness grows. You don't wait until you feel confident to speak up. You speak, and confidence builds. You don't wait until you feel disciplined. You act, and discipline strengthens. Action precedes identity. Not the other way around. But here's why this illusion is powerful. When you say, I'm preparing, people praise you. When you say, I'm working on it, people nod approvingly. But results don't respond to applause. They respond to repetition. Now let's go deeper. Waiting creates a hidden cost. Momentum decay. The longer you wait, the heavier the start feels, the more dramatic it becomes in your mind, the more it intimidates you, and suddenly something small becomes monumental. Starting a workout feels overwhelming. Posting content feels terrifying. Making a call feels impossible. Because delay inflated the fear. The 1% shorten delay cycles. They think, they decide, they act. Not recklessly, but swiftly. They understand speed builds confidence. And speed doesn't mean rushing. It means reducing hesitation. Hesitation is where self-doubt grows. Now ask yourself this. What are you currently waiting on? Be specific. A career pivot, a fitness goal, a creative project, a difficult conversation, a new habit. And then ask, what exactly must happen before I start? Is it realistic or is it comfortable? Because most waiting is not strategic. It's emotional. It protects ego. It protects identity. It protects the illusion of capability without risk. But here's the truth. You will never feel fully ready. Growth always feels slightly uncomfortable. If it feels easy, it's probably familiar. And familiar doesn't change your life. Here's a powerful reframe. Instead of asking, am I ready? Ask, am I willing to grow through this? That shifts the focus from comfort to courage. And courage compounds. The first time you act despite fear, it's hard. The second time, slightly easier. By the 10th time, it becomes character. And character is what separates the 1%. Not luck, not background, not genius. Character. The willingness to act before certainty. Now here's something most people don't realize. The 1% start small. They don't begin with massive moves. They begin with consistent ones. Small actions, daily repetitions, minor improvements, but they don't delay them. They stack them, and stacking builds momentum. Momentum builds belief. Belief builds identity, and identity shapes destiny. So here's your challenge. Pick one thing you've been postponing, just one, not everything, one, and move on it within 24 hours. Not perfectly, not massively, just decisively. Because the illusion of readiness dissolves only through action. And if this chapter hits you, If you're recognizing your own delays, don't scroll away from this moment. Commit, even silently. Say to yourself, I will not wait to become who I could be. That is the turning point. But there's something even deeper than hesitation. Because sometimes you do act, you do start, you do commit, and then you quit. Not because you couldn't, but because it stopped feeling exciting. And that leads us to the next illusion, the one that keeps people cycling between intense motivation and silent collapse. Chapter 7, The Motivation Myth. And this is where discipline begins to take center stage. If you appreciate our efforts and our thoughts, subscribe and like this video. We need to show the world that there are many people like us. We must always continue to improve. Chapter 7, The Motivation Myth. Motivation feels powerful. It feels electric. It feels unstoppable. It feels like transformation is inevitable. And that's exactly why it's dangerous, because motivation is emotional. And emotions fluctuate. You've felt it before. That surge after watching something inspiring, that clarity after a breakthrough conversation, that intensity on January 1st, that fire after a setback. You promise yourself this time is different. This time you'll stick to it. This time you won't quit. And for a few days, maybe weeks, you're unstoppable. Then life interrupts. Energy drops. Stress rises, sleep declines, and the fire fades. Now what? This is where the 99% fall back, because they built their change on emotion, and emotion is unstable. The 1% don't rely on motivation. They rely on structure. That is the difference. Motivation starts the engine. Structure keeps it running. Most people chase the feeling of motivation. The 1% build systems that work without it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If you only act when you feel like it, you are not in control. Your mood is. Let that sink in. Your mood becomes your manager. Your energy becomes your boss. Your comfort becomes your decision maker. And moods are unreliable leaders. Now think about this clearly. Have you ever said, I just wasn't feeling it? That sentence has cost more dreams than lack of talent ever could. The 1% don't wake up inspired every day. They wake up committed. Commitment outlasts emotion. Commitment doesn't negotiate with how you feel. It says, this gets done. And that's where discipline enters. Discipline is not dramatic. It is repetitive. It is quiet. It is often boring. And boring doesn't trend, but boring builds. The illusion of the 1% says they are constantly driven, constantly energized, constantly passionate. That's false. They simply execute regardless of emotion. Let's go deeper. Motivation is external. It often comes from content, speeches, competition, praise. Discipline is internal. It comes from identity. When you see yourself as someone who follows through, you follow through. When you see yourself as someone who finishes, you finish. That's why identity matters so much. Because discipline is identity in motion. Now ask yourself honestly, do you trust yourself to keep promises when no one is watching? That question is heavy, because trust with yourself determines confidence. Every time you quit something you committed to, a small fracture forms. You start doubting your own word, and confidence declines, not because you're incapable, but because you're inconsistent. The 1% build self-trust deliberately. They make small commitments. They keep them, they stack them, and that stacking creates internal credibility. Internal credibility creates unshakable confidence, and confidence reduces emotional volatility. It becomes a cycle. Now here's a powerful realization. Motivation feels like intensity. Discipline feels like identity. Intensity fades. identity endures. Most people want intensity. Few build identity. And identity is built through repetition, especially on days you don't feel like it. The day you train, tired. The day you work when uninspired. The day you study when bored. The day you show up when unnoticed. Those are identity days. And identity days compound. Let's make this practical. Instead of asking, how do I stay motivated? Ask, how do I remove decision fatigue? Structure your environment. Lay out your workout clothes the night before. Block time on your calendar. Turn off unnecessary notifications. Automate small decisions. Make the right choice easier. Because discipline is not just willpower, it's design. The 1% design their days. The 99% react to them. Now here's something deeper. Motivation often collapses because the reward feels distant. You start something. You don't see results quickly. Your brain loses interest. It wants dopamine now. Scrolling gives dopamine now. Snacks give dopamine now. Entertainment gives dopamine now. Growth gives delayed dopamine. And that's why discipline feels harder. But here's the twist. When you build discipline, delayed dopamine becomes satisfying. You begin enjoying progress. You begin appreciating consistency. You begin valuing restraint. That shift is maturity. And maturity separates the 1%. Not age, maturity. The ability to prioritize future gain over present comfort. And this applies everywhere. Finances, health, relationships, skill, reputation. Every area rewards delayed gratification. Now imagine this clearly. What would your life look like in 5 years if you executed consistently without waiting for motivation? Not perfectly, just consistently. How different would your income be? Your body? Your mindset? Your opportunities? The difference wouldn't be dramatic in a week. It would be undeniable in a year, and transformational in 5. That's the real secret. Time magnifies discipline. Time exposes inconsistency. The 1% respect time. The 99% underestimate it. Now here's your pivot. Stop chasing motivation. Build minimum standards. Standards you execute regardless of mood. 3 non-negotiables per day. Small but consistent, and protect them fiercely. Because when standards become identity, you no longer need inspiration. You become reliable. And reliability builds momentum. But there's another illusion waiting beneath this one. Because even disciplined people sometimes sabotage themselves, not because they lack effort, but because they lack clarity. And clarity determines direction. Without direction, discipline becomes wasted energy. Which brings us to the next chapter, Chapter 8, Clarity Before Acceleration. Because moving fast in the wrong direction is still losing, and the illusion of speed has fooled more people than laziness ever could. Chapter 8, Clarity Before Acceleration. Speed is seductive. In 2025, speed is worshipped. Fast growth, fast money, fast scaling, fast results. Everyone wants acceleration, but almost no one pauses for direction. And here's the dangerous illusion. If I move fast enough, I'll figure it out along the way. Sometimes that works. Often, it magnifies confusion. Because acceleration without clarity multiplies mistakes. The 99% chase movement, the 1% prioritize alignment. And alignment requires something uncomfortable. Stillness, thinking, honest evaluation. Most people are afraid of stillness because when you slow down, you must confront reality. Are you building what you actually want or what looks impressive? Are you pursuing fulfillment or validation? Are you chasing income or status? Are you working toward freedom or applause? These are not surface-level questions. These are identity questions. And without answering them, you risk climbing a ladder leaning against the wrong wall. Imagine spending 10 years accelerating toward a goal, only to realize it never aligned with who you wanted to become. That's not rare, it's common. People build careers they hate, lifestyles they can't sustain, reputations they feel trapped inside because they moved fast, without thinking deeply. The 1% don't just ask, "How do I win?" They ask, "What does winning mean to me?" That question changes everything, because clarity defines direction, and direction defines efficiency. Without clarity, discipline becomes exhaustion. With clarity, discipline becomes precision. Let's get practical. What does your ideal life actually look like? Not the Instagram version, not the influencer version, not the comparison-driven version, your version. What does a powerful day feel like? Who are you around? What are you working on? What do you refuse to tolerate? If you can't describe it, you can't build it. The 1% journal reflect, recalibrate. They don't drift blindly. They design intentionally. Now here's the subtle trap. You might think you have clarity, but borrowed goals feel clear too. Society defines success loudly. 6 figures, home ownership, entrepreneurship, luxury travel, recognition. But those are metrics, not meaning. And meaning sustains momentum. Without meaning, you burn out. Because external success without internal alignment creates tension. The 99% chase visible markers. The 1% define invisible values. Values guide decisions when motivation fades. Values anchor discipline when distractions appear. And values prevent you from chasing every opportunity, because not every opportunity aligns. Now ask yourself honestly, what are your non-negotiables? Integrity, health, family, freedom, mastery, contribution? If your daily behavior contradicts your values, confusion grows. But if your daily actions reflect your values, momentum builds naturally. Clarity reduces friction. You don't hesitate as much. You don't second-guess as often. You don't compare as intensely, because you're building your path, not theirs. Now, here's something powerful. Clarity also eliminates distraction. When you know your direction, opportunities become filters. You can say no without guilt. You can decline without fear. Because alignment gives confidence. Most people say yes too often because they lack a defined direction. They fear missing out. The 1% fear delusion. They protect focus. They narrow targets. They specialize. And specialization builds leverage. Let's go deeper. Clarity requires self-awareness, and self-awareness requires honesty. Where are you actually strong? Where are you pretending? What skills are underdeveloped? What habits are sabotaging you? This is not self-criticism. This is self-mapping. You cannot navigate a territory you refuse to observe. The 1% audit themselves regularly. They ask, what's working? What's not? What must change? And they adjust. Adjustment is strength. Stubbornness without reflection is weakness. Now imagine this clearly. You remove comparison. You reduce busyness. You stop blaming. You act before ready. You build discipline. But you never define direction. You will move, but you may not arrive. Clarity is the compass. Discipline is the engine. Both are required. Now here's your pivot moment. Take a deep breath and answer this honestly. If no one was watching, what would you pursue? Because sometimes the loudest goals are not your own. And once you identify your direction, acceleration becomes powerful. Because you're no longer drifting. You're aiming. And when aim meets discipline, progress becomes inevitable. But clarity alone isn't enough, because once you define direction, you must confront something else. Fear of visibility, because growth attracts attention, and attention triggers insecurity. Chapter 9. The fear of being seen. And this is where many people shrink back, just as momentum begins to build. Chapter 9. The fear of being seen. At first, you fear failure. Then you fear judgment. Then something more subtle appears. You fear visibility. You fear what happens when people notice, because growth changes how people see you. And that shift can feel uncomfortable. When you start improving, when you start earning more, when you start speaking differently, when you start carrying yourself with certainty, people react. Some celebrate you, some question you, some distance themselves, and some quietly hope you fall back to who you were, not because they hate you, but because your growth disrupts their comfort. And this is where many people shrink, not because they can't succeed, but because they don't want to stand out. Standing out feels risky. Standing out feels exposed. Standing out invites scrutiny, and scrutiny triggers insecurity. The 99% subconsciously aim to stay acceptable. The 1% accept being misunderstood. That's a major shift, because visibility amplifies everything. Your mistakes become public. Your wins become noticed. Your progress becomes measured. And if you are not secure internally, you'll retreat. Now ask yourself honestly, have you ever downplayed your ambition to avoid intimidating others? Have you ever minimized your success to stay relatable? Have you ever delayed posting, sharing, launching, or speaking because of what people will think? That is the fear of being seen. It's not about ego. It's about exposure. When you stay small, you stay safe. When you grow, you risk criticism. And criticism is uncomfortable. But here's the truth. Criticism is proof of movement. No one critiques someone who isn't moving. No one resents someone who isn't progressing. No one questions someone who isn't changing. Growth creates friction, and friction is visibility. The 1% understand something critical. Reputation is built through repetition, under observation. You cannot become influential while invisible. You cannot lead while hiding. You cannot build impact while shrinking. Now, this doesn't mean you must become loud. It means you must become unapologetic. There's a difference. The 99% hide their ambition behind humility. The 1% practice quiet confidence. They don't brag, but they don't dim either, because dimming yourself does not protect you, it limits you. Let's go deeper. Sometimes fear of visibility is rooted in past identity. If you've always been the quiet one, the average one, the reliable one, the background one, breaking that role feels uncomfortable. Your mind says, this isn't who I am. But remember, Chapter 2, identity is editable. You are not obligated to remain who you were. Growth requires evolution, and evolution disrupts familiarity. Now here's something powerful. When you fear being seen, ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid they'll see? Your flaws, your effort, your ambition, your desire for more, because often the fear is not of failure, it's of exposure. Exposure means accountability. If people see you trying, they'll notice if you quit. If people see you building, they'll notice if you disappear. Visibility removes escape routes, and that's uncomfortable, but discomfort builds character. The 1% lean into visibility strategically. They build skills publicly. They improve in front of others. They accept being beginners because they know something most people avoid. Embarrassment fades. Regret lingers. Let that settle. Embarrassment fades. Regret lingers. Most people fear temporary embarrassment more than permanent stagnation. That's the illusion. Now imagine this clearly. You commit to growth. You execute consistently. You define your direction, and you allow yourself to be seen trying. What changes? Opportunities increase. Connections expand. Confidence deepens. Because visibility builds leverage. People cannot support what they cannot see. People cannot hire what they cannot evaluate. People cannot respect what they cannot observe. Hiding protects ego. Visibility builds influence. Now here's the turning point. Stop asking, will they approve? Start asking, will I regret staying silent? Because regret compounds. Missed opportunities stack. Unspoken ideas linger. And years pass quickly. The 1% act before regret becomes heavy. They risk misunderstanding to avoid stagnation. And here's your pivot question. If you weren't afraid of being judged, what would you start tomorrow? That answer matters. Because fear of visibility is the final layer before expansion. And once you break that layer, momentum accelerates. But expansion brings another challenge. Because once you step into visibility, once you start progressing, once you build momentum, you face something even more subtle. Success anxiety. Yes, anxiety about succeeding. Because success changes expectations. And expectations increase pressure. Chapter 10. The pressure of rising. And this is where the illusion becomes psychological. Because growth doesn't just require discipline, it requires emotional stability. Friend, write your opinion on this topic in the comments. Do you agree with us or not? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Chapter 10. The pressure of rising. At first, you're afraid to start. Then you're afraid to be seen. And once you begin to rise, a new fear appears. What if I can't maintain this? What if I disappoint them? What if I lose what I've built? Success anxiety is real. No one talks about it. But it silently sabotages progress because growth increases expectations. When no one expects much from you, there's freedom, low pressure, low scrutiny, low responsibility. But when you improve, when your income grows, when your body changes, when your confidence strengthens, people notice. And now there's pressure. Pressure to sustain, pressure to deliver, pressure to prove it wasn't luck. And if your identity hasn't caught up with your results, you'll feel unstable. This is where many people self-sabotage. They slow down, they procrastinate, they shrink, because subconsciously returning to the familiar feels safer than maintaining the unfamiliar. The 99% are comfortable with struggle. The 1% become comfortable with responsibility. That's the shift. Responsibility is heavy. More money means more decisions. More visibility means more criticism. More opportunity means more risk. Growth expands capacity, but only if you allow it. Now ask yourself honestly, have you ever achieved something only to immediately feel anxiety? A promotion, a successful launch, a new relationship, a public win. And instead of pure pride, you felt pressure. That's identity lag. Your external reality changed faster than your internal belief system. And when identity lags behind results, fear appears. You think, I don't belong here. What if they realize I'm not as capable? What if this is temporary? That voice is not proof of inadequacy. It's proof of expansion. Because expansion stretches comfort. The 1% expect that stretch. They anticipate discomfort. They prepare for it. They normalize it. Instead of interpreting pressure as danger, they interpret it as growth. Pressure means you're leveling up. Pressure means you're operating beyond your old baseline. Pressure means your environment has changed. And growth always changes environment. But here's where it gets psychological. If you grew up around limitation, around scarcity, around small ceilings, success can feel like betrayal. You might feel guilty. You might feel disconnected. You might feel like you're leaving people behind. That guilt can quietly pull you backward because humans crave belonging, and success can create distance. The 99% shrink to preserve belonging. The 1% expand and build new rooms. They understand that growth sometimes requires new circles, new standards, new conversations. And that doesn't mean arrogance. It means alignment. Let's go deeper. Pressure also tests discipline. When things improve, you're tempted to relax. You think, I've earned this. And rest is necessary, but comfort creeps back in quickly. Remember Chapter 1. Comfort builds cages that feel like freedom. When you rise, you must raise standards with you because maintenance requires more discipline than growth. It's easy to grind when you're desperate. It's harder to grind when you're comfortable. And this is where the illusion traps many. They reach a milestone. They plateau. They settle. Because sustaining excellence requires emotional regulation. Not hype. Not bursts of energy. Regulation. The ability to handle praise without ego. Criticism without collapse. Pressure without panic. That emotional stability separates long-term success from temporary spikes. Now here's a powerful line to internalize. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your standards. If your standards remain low, your results will eventually follow. If your standards evolve, your identity evolves. And identity sustains performance. So here's the pivot. When you feel pressure, don't interpret it as threat. Interpret it as expansion. Ask, what skill must I build to sustain this level? What habit must I reinforce? What mindset must I adopt? Because pressure reveals gaps, and gaps reveal growth points. Now imagine this clearly. You stop blaming. You eliminate distraction. You act without waiting. You build discipline. You gain clarity. You allow visibility. You handle pressure. What happens? You begin operating differently. You no longer move emotionally. You move strategically. And that shift changes everything. But there's one more illusion that must be dismantled. The biggest one. Because even after everything we've covered, many people still believe something dangerous. They believe the 1% are defined by money alone, and that belief is incomplete. Chapter 11, the redefinition of wealth. Because if you don't redefine wealth, you may chase the wrong currency, and that mistake can cost you everything. Chapter 11, the redefinition of wealth. When you hear the 1%, what do you picture? Money, mansions, private jets, luxury watches, financial dominance. That's the image sold to you. And it's incomplete, because if wealth is only money, then anyone with cash is powerful. But you've seen it. People with money and no peace. People with status and no stability. People with fame and no freedom. The illusion says wealth equals income. The truth says wealth equals control. Control over time. Control over attention. Control over emotion. Control over environment. Control over identity. Money amplifies, but it does not anchor. The 99% chase income first. The 1% build leverage first, and leverage creates sustainable wealth. Let's break that down. Income is linear. You work, you earn, you stop, it slows. Leverage is exponential. You build systems, you build skills, you build reputation, you build assets. And those continue without constant effort. But there's an even deeper layer. True wealth begins internally. Because if you cannot control your impulses, money will control you. If you cannot control your emotions, status will destabilize you. If you cannot control your focus, opportunity will overwhelm you. The 1% illusion tricks you into thinking the game is financial. But the real game is psychological. Financial growth is external expansion. Psychological growth is internal capacity. Without capacity, expansion collapses. Now, ask yourself something honest. If your income doubled tomorrow, would your habits support it? Would your discipline sustain it? Would your relationships handle it? Would your identity absorb it? Or would chaos follow? Wealth amplifies who you already are. That's why discipline comes first. Clarity comes first. Emotional regulation comes first. Because internal wealth creates external stability. Now let's talk about another illusion, time poverty. Many people earn money, but they lose control of time. They are trapped in calendars, trapped in obligations, trapped in constant urgency, and they call it success. But success without time freedom is fragile. The 1% think in decades. The 99% think in pay cycles. That difference changes decisions. Short-term thinking chases immediate gain. Long-term thinking builds enduring freedom. Let me give you a powerful line. If your lifestyle requires constant intensity to maintain, it's not wealth, it's dependency. True wealth gives margin. Margin to rest. Margin to think. Margin to pivot. Margin to grow. And margin requires restraint. Most people upgrade lifestyle faster than they upgrade discipline. Income rises, spending rises, obligations rise, pressure rises, and suddenly they're running faster. Just to stay in place, that's not wealth, that's escalation. The 1% understand delayed gratification at scale. They build foundations before upgrades. They build assets before aesthetics. They build resilience before expansion. Now, here's something deeper. Wealth also includes mental clarity. Can you sit alone without anxiety? Can you disconnect without panic? Can you say no without guilt? Can you handle silence without distraction? That's wealth. Attention control is wealth. Because attention determines output. Output determines value. Value determines income. But attention is under constant attack. If you can't protect it, you can't build anything meaningful. The 1% guard attention aggressively. They limit noise. They filter information. They choose inputs carefully. Because what enters the mind shapes decisions. And decisions compound. Now imagine this clearly. You gain financial success, but you're emotionally unstable. You're reactive. You're impulsive. You're insecure. You're addicted to validation. That wealth becomes volatile. But if you gain emotional discipline first, financial growth becomes steady. And steady compounds. Here's another layer. Health is wealth. Without energy, ambition fades. Without clarity, execution slows. Without physical discipline, mental resilience weakens. The 99% sacrifice health for hustle. The 1% integrate health into performance because they understand longevity matters. It's not about winning 1 year. It's about sustaining decades. Now let's address something uncomfortable. Some people chase wealth to prove something, to parents, to peers, to critics, to themselves. But when wealth becomes validation, it never satisfies because validation is external, and external approval fluctuates. True wealth begins when you no longer need applause to feel worthy, when your standards are internal, when your identity is grounded, when your discipline is self-directed. That's power, not money alone. Now here's the reframe. The 1% is not defined by net worth. It's defined by self-mastery. Because self-mastery unlocks every other form of leverage: financial, social, professional, creative. And self-mastery is available to anyone willing to build it. Not instantly, but progressively. So ask yourself honestly, are you chasing income or building leverage? Are you chasing status or building skill? Are you chasing applause or building capacity? Because one path feels exciting, the other feels slow. But slow is sustainable, and sustainable becomes dominant. Now imagine this. You redefine wealth as time freedom, attention control, emotional stability, health discipline, strategic clarity, financial leverage. That version of wealth cannot be faked. It cannot be flexed easily. It cannot be shown in a 15-second clip. But it builds real power, and real power compounds quietly. Now here's your pivot question. If money were removed from the equation, would you still respect your habits? Would you still admire your discipline? Would you still value your identity? If not, start there. Because wealth begins internally, and once internal wealth stabilizes, external wealth accelerates naturally. But we're not done dismantling illusions. Because there's one more narrative that traps people. The belief that success requires extreme sacrifice. That to rise, you must suffer endlessly. That to win, you must lose yourself. And that belief keeps many from starting. Chapter 12. The Balance Myth. Because the truth about sacrifice is more nuanced than you've been told. And once you understand it, you'll stop fearing growth. Chapter 12. The balance. Myth, you've heard it before. If you want to be in the 1%, you must sacrifice everything: sleep, relationships, health, peace. You've been told success demands obsession, that balance is weakness, that rest is laziness, and that belief scares people. It makes growth feel extreme, unattainable, unhealthy. But here's the truth most don't understand. Sacrifice is real, but chaos is optional. The 99% either avoid sacrifice completely or they burn themselves out trying to sprint endlessly. The 1% sacrifice strategically. That's the difference. They don't sacrifice everything. They sacrifice what conflicts with their direction. There's nuance here. You cannot grow without giving something up. You cannot rise without releasing comfort. You cannot build without reallocating time. But sacrifice does not mean destruction. It means prioritization. Let's break this down clearly. If you want to build skill, you must sacrifice distraction. If you want financial growth, you must sacrifice impulsive spending. If you want health, you must sacrifice convenience. If you want clarity, you must sacrifice noise. That's not extreme. That's alignment. The illusion says, to reach the 1%, you must suffer endlessly. The truth says, to reach the 1%, you must choose intentionally. Now here's where many get confused. They see someone grinding 16-hour days. They see intense hustle culture. They see burnout glamorized, and they think that's the only path. But intensity without intelligence is self-sabotage. The 1% are not chaotic workers. They are optimized performers. They understand seasons. There are seasons of acceleration and seasons of consolidation, seasons of building and seasons of refining, seasons of expansion and seasons of stabilization. The 99% either drift lazily or sprint recklessly. The 1% pace strategically. Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever tried to change everything at once? New diet, new workout, new routine, new goals, new mindset. and within weeks, it collapsed. That's not lack of potential. That's lack of sustainability. Growth must be integrated, not forced. If you sacrifice sleep, relationships, and health to chase success, eventually your foundation cracks, and rebuilding becomes harder. Now, here's the powerful truth. Balance is not equal distribution. It's intentional allocation. Some seasons require more focus on one area, but no season should destroy the others, because destruction creates fragility, and fragility collapses under pressure. The 1% build resilience. Resilience requires maintenance, physical, emotional, mental, relational, financial, all interconnected. Now let's go deeper. Sacrifice often feels painful because it's identity-based. If you identify as someone who relaxes often, cutting distractions feels like loss. If you identify as someone who socializes constantly, prioritizing work feels isolating. If you identify as someone who avoids risk, taking bold action feels threatening. But remember earlier, identity is editable. You're not losing yourself. You're evolving. The discomfort of sacrifice is temporary. The benefit compounds. Now, here's a powerful line. You don't sacrifice pleasure forever. You sacrifice distraction temporarily. There's a difference. Distraction feels good short term. Pleasure earned through discipline feels good long term. The 1% delay pleasure strategically, but they still experience joy. They just experience it from alignment, not avoidance. Now imagine this clearly. You wake up disciplined. You execute with clarity. You protect your health. You nurture key relationships. You build financially with intention. That's not imbalance. That's integration. Integration creates strength. Now let's address something subtle. Some people use balance as an excuse to avoid intensity. They say, I want balance. But what they mean is, I don't want discomfort. Balance without growth is stagnation. Growth without awareness is burnout. The middle path requires maturity, and maturity is rare. The 1% are not extreme. They are deliberate. They know when to push. They know when to recover. They know when to expand. They know when to refine. And that awareness builds longevity. Now here's your pivot question. What are you unwilling to sacrifice? That is holding you back? Be honest. Late night scrolling, unproductive friendships, excess spending, comfortable routines, validation seeking? Because growth demands trade-offs, not everything, but something. And clarity determines what. If this chapter is shifting your perspective, let that settle. Growth does not require self-destruction. It requires self-direction, and self-direction builds power. But we're not finished dismantling illusions, because there's a deeper truth waiting, one that sits beneath discipline, beneath clarity, beneath sacrifice. It's about self-image, because at the core of everything, you will never outperform your self-perception. Chapter 13, the ceiling of self-image, and this is where transformation becomes irreversible. Chapter 13, the ceiling of self-image. You can build discipline. You can gain clarity. You can sacrifice distractions. You can execute consistently. But if your self-image remains small, you will sabotage everything, because you do not rise to the level of your effort. You rise to the level of your identity. Self-image is the invisible ceiling. It determines how much success feels normal. It determines how much income feels safe. It determines how much attention feels tolerable. It determines how much responsibility feels acceptable. And once you hit that ceiling, you unconsciously self-correct downward. Let's be honest. Have you ever improved your habits only to drift back to your old baseline? Have you ever increased your income, then increased your expenses to match? Have you ever started strong, then gradually returned to who you were? That's not lack of discipline, that's identity gravity. Your mind protects what feels familiar, even if familiar is limited. If you see yourself as average, exceptional results feel unstable. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, consistency feels foreign. If you see yourself as not leadership material, influence feels uncomfortable, and discomfort triggers retreat. The 1% expand self-image intentionally. They don't just upgrade behavior, they upgrade belief. And belief shapes standards. Standards shape action, action shapes results. Results reinforce belief. It's a loop. And if you don't consciously update self-image, your past will dictate your future. Now here's the critical realization. Your self-image was formed early, from feedback, from comparison, from environment, from repeated experiences. If you failed repeatedly as a child, you may see yourself as incapable. If you were criticized often, you may see yourself as inadequate. If you were praised only for small achievements, you may unconsciously fear bigger ones. That programming runs silently, but it can be rewritten. The 1% understand something powerful. Self-image is built through evidence, small wins, kept promises, repeated discipline. Each action becomes proof. Proof builds belief. Belief raises ceiling. So instead of saying, I want to be successful, say, I am becoming someone who executes daily. That's identity language. Instead of saying, I hope I can do this, say, I am building the capacity to handle this. Identity shapes emotion. Emotion shapes persistence. Now ask yourself honestly, when you imagine significant success, do you feel excitement or tension? If you feel tension, that's your self-image signaling mismatch. You don't yet see yourself at that level. And that's not permanent. It's adjustable, but adjustment requires repetition. You must act like the person you aim to become before you feel like them, because action precedes belief. Most people wait to feel confident. The 1% act until confidence feels natural. And here's a powerful line. Act as the next version of you, not recklessly, but intentionally. If the future version of you is disciplined, be disciplined today. If the future version of you is focused, eliminate distractions today. If the future version of you is confident, speak with clarity today. You don't become first, you practice first. Now here's the deep layer. Self-image also determines tolerance. What behavior do you tolerate from yourself? Late excuses, missed commitments, low effort, negative self-talk? If you tolerate it, it becomes identity. The 1% raise internal tolerance standards. They don't tolerate chronic excuses. They don't tolerate emotional volatility. They don't tolerate inconsistency, not because they're harsh, because they're intentional. Now imagine this clearly. Your self-image expands. You see yourself as capable, disciplined, strategic, resilient. Suddenly, higher standards feel normal. Responsibility feels natural. Visibility feels manageable. And pressure feels deserved. That shift changes trajectory. Because when success aligns with self-image, sustainability becomes easy. Now let's go deeper. Some people fear expanding self-image because it demands letting go of old narratives. If you've always identified as the underdog, winning feels strange. If you've always identified as the helper, leading feels intimidating. If you've always identified as the quiet one, visibility feels overwhelming. But growth demands new stories, and you must author them intentionally. The 1% don't wait for permission to redefine themselves. They decide, and then they behave accordingly. Here's your pivot moment. What story have you been telling about yourself? I'm not disciplined. I'm not business-minded. I'm not confident. I'm not lucky. Now challenge it. Not emotionally, strategically. What small daily actions would contradict that story? Because contradiction builds new narrative, and new narrative builds new ceiling. Let this settle deeply. You cannot outperform your self-image long-term. So raise it, one promise kept at a time, one disciplined act at a time, one bold move at a time, and the illusion of the 1% begins to dissolve. Because you realize something powerful. They didn't become different overnight. They rewrote who they believed they were. But there's another layer we must confront. Because expanding self-image requires something uncomfortable. Letting go of who you've been. Chapter 14. The Death of the Old You. And this is where transformation stops being theoretical and becomes personal. Chapter 14. The Death of the Old You. Transformation sounds exciting until it becomes real, because real transformation requires loss, not of potential, but of identity. You cannot become someone new without letting someone old fade, and that is uncomfortable, because the old you is familiar, predictable, recognizable, safe. Even if that version of you was limited, even if that version of you was inconsistent, even if that version of you was distracted. Familiarity feels secure, growth feels uncertain, and the mind prefers certainty. Now here's the hard truth. If you are serious about rising, some parts of you must die. The excuses, the procrastination patterns, the social habits that drain you, the narratives that protect comfort, the identity that says, "This is just who I am." That identity must dissolve, and dissolution feels like instability, because when you shed old habits, you don't immediately feel like the new version either. There's a gap, and in that gap, most people retreat. They return to what feels known. But the 1% endure the identity gap. They tolerate being in between. Not fully who they were, not fully who they're becoming, but committed to the transition. Let me ask you something honestly. What version of you is currently holding you back? Be specific. The one who sleeps in? The one who avoids hard conversations? The one who overthinks? The one who chases validation? The one who fears risk? That version feels comfortable because you've practiced it for years. But comfort is not destiny. Now understand something powerful. Growth is not addition, it is subtraction. You don't add discipline, you remove excuses. You don't add clarity, you remove distraction. You don't add confidence, you remove self-doubt through repetition. Subtraction is painful because it feels like losing part of yourself. But what you're losing is limitation. Now here's the emotional reality. When you begin shedding old behaviors, some relationships will shift, some conversations will feel distant, some environments will feel misaligned, and that's not betrayal, it's evolution. The 99% cling to old environments to preserve belonging. The 1% create new environments aligned with growth, because environment reinforces identity. If you stay surrounded by small thinking, your expansion feels foreign. If you stay surrounded by complacency, your discipline feels extreme. If you stay surrounded by distraction, your focus feels isolating. But growth requires new standards, and new standards sometimes require new rooms. That doesn't mean abandoning people, it means upgrading proximity. Now here's something deeper. Letting go of the old you also means forgiving the old you. You cannot carry shame into growth. You cannot hate who you were and build who you'll become. You must acknowledge past patterns without condemning yourself. Because self-hatred does not build discipline. Self-respect does. And self-respect begins when you decide, I will no longer live beneath my potential. That is not arrogance. It's responsibility. Now imagine this clearly. You wake up tomorrow and decide, the distracted version of me is gone. The excuse-driven version of me is gone. The procrastinating version of me is gone. Not magically, but intentionally. Every time the old pattern appears, you interrupt it. Every time the old narrative whispers, you contradict it. Every time the old comfort calls, you choose growth. That's how identity shifts, not in one dramatic moment, but in repeated micro-decisions. Now here's the powerful line. The old you will fight for survival. Expect it. The mind resists change. It prefers efficiency. And old habits are efficient. They require less thought, less discipline, less friction. But growth requires conscious effort. And effort feels heavier at first. That weight is temporary. Eventually, the new behavior becomes normal. Eventually, discipline feels natural. Eventually, clarity feels default. Eventually, the new you feels familiar. But you must endure the transition. Now let's go deeper. Sometimes you romanticize the old you. You remember the ease, the comfort, the fun without responsibility. And you question your growth. You think, wasn't life simpler? Yes, but simpler is not always stronger. Comfort without growth creates stagnation. Growth without comfort creates evolution, and evolution builds leverage. Now here's your pivot question. If you continue as you are, who will you be in 5 years? Picture it clearly. Habits unchanged, mindset unchanged, discipline unchanged. Is that acceptable? If not, then the old you must dissolve. And dissolution requires courage. Now here's your final integration. The 1% illusion survives only when you believe. They are different. But now you know. They are disciplined. They are clear. They are responsible. They are consistent. They are patient. They are willing to evolve. And those traits are trainable. Trainable, not inherited, not reserved, not exclusive. Trainable. And that means the door is open. But doors do not force you through. You must walk. Now, here is your personal contract moment. If this resonated, if something inside you shifted, don't let it fade into another consumed idea. Commit to one standard, just one, that you will not negotiate for the next 30 days. Wake time, workout routine, deep work hour, financial tracking, reading habit. Choose one, protect it, and build identity through it, because identity builds everything else. If this audiobook challenged you, if it exposed delusions you didn't realize you were living, if it made you uncomfortable in the best way, hit like, not for validation, but as a contract with yourself. A visible marker that says, I'm choosing discipline over comfort. And in the comments, declare your one non-negotiable, not for attention, for accountability. Because public declaration increases commitment. And if you know someone trapped in the illusion, someone who believes success is reserved for others, share this with them, not to impress them, to awaken them, because awareness spreads, and standards elevate communities. And if you're serious about staying accountable to growth, subscribe, not to consume more content passively, but to reinforce a pattern of learning intentionally. This is not a movement of hype. It's a movement of standards, and standards change lives. Now let this final line settle deeply. You were never outside the 1%. You were outside the standards of the 1%, and standards can be chosen right now, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, decisively. The illusion is broken. The choice is yours. And 5 years from now, you will either thank yourself for choosing discipline or wish you had. Choose wisely, because the next version of you is waiting on the other side of consistency.